on July 19, 2019. Written comments may be submitted this evening or may be mailed to Daniel Sinello at the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation or emailed to publiccomment@renewnyc.com. As I mentioned, Mr. Sinello's contact cards containing LMDC's address are also available at the documents table. The address is 22 Cortlandt Street, 11th floor, New York, New York, 10007. The phone number is 212-962-2300, and the email address is publiccomment@renewnyc.com. All comments presented at this hearing and those submitted in writing and received by 5 p.m. on July 19, 2019 will be reviewed by the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation in its consideration of the actions which are the subject of this hearing. For your information, the stenographic transcript of tonight's hearing, including the oral comments received during the course of this session, is being made. Starting on July 22, 2019, the transcript of this hearing and a copy of any submitted written statements will be available on request for inspection by the public by appointment between the hours of 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. at LMDC's office during the comment period. Upon written request and payment of reproduction costs, a copy of the record of today's hearing and any written submissions will be provided to any person making such request. The following representatives of LMDC are present to hear your comments and will receive copies of today's transcript and any written comments that are received by 5 p.m. on July 19, 2019. Daniel Sinello, Acting President of LMDC, and Goldie Waxel, Senior Counsel for LMDC. Tonight's session will be organized into two parts. First, a representative of LMDC will give a brief description of the public uses to be served by the proposed property acquisitions and dispositions, the parcels and their location, and the impact of the proposed acquisitions and dispositions on the environment and residents of the locality where the project will be undertaken. And second, following an explanation of some procedures, members of the public will be invited to provide their comments. Attendees should sign in on the attendance sheet. Please clearly print your name, address, and affiliation, if any. If you wish to speak tonight, you must also fill out a speaker request card, which are available at the sign-in table. I would now like to introduce Goldie Waxel of the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Goldie Waxel, and I am here tonight representing the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, LMDC. Thank you for coming out on this rainy night to hear about the next steps that LMDC is going to be taking to implement the general project plan for the World Trade Center Memorial and Cultural Program. Tonight's hearing is about LMDC's proposed acquisition by condemnation and disposition of certain parcels at the World Trade Center area that are needed to further implement the general project plan. These parcels include parcels that were part of city streets prior to September 11th, but which are now part of the redesigned World Trade Center site, and other parcels that had been part of the World Trade Center site prior to September 11th, but which are now built as city streets. There are also 2 easements related to the Oculus and the Performing Arts Center. To be clear, in all cases, except for the easement related to the Performing Arts Center, which has been designed but not yet built, and the Albany Street parcel, these transfers will simply conform ownership of the parcels with their current as-built uses. All of the parcels that are proposed to be acquired by LMDC through condemnation are parcels owned by the city that were part of city streets but which are now part of the rebuilt World Trade Center site. None of the parcels at issue in today's hearing are privately owned. I'm going to start by very briefly describing the general project plan. Next slide. There we go. This is LMDC. This is the map from LMDC's general project plan that was approved as amended on February 14th, 2007, pursuant to the New York State Urban Development Corporation Act. Of course, after a complete environmental review and a series of public hearings. The general project plan describes the details of what we call the World Trade Center Memorial and Redevelopment Plan. As mentioned earlier, copies of the general project plan are available at the documents table. The general project plan provides for the creation of a permanent memorial remembering and honoring the thousands of innocent men, women, and children lost on September 11th and February 26, 1993, and for the redevelopment of the World Trade Center as a mixed-use center of commerce, public space, and culture with the memorial at its heart. The general project plan covers two parts of the World Trade Center that are relevant to the proposed acquisitions and dispositions that are subject of today's hearing. The first part is the original World Trade Center site located between Vesey Street and Liberty Street. That was the northern part of this plan. Thus far, the general project plan has facilitated the creation of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, the Oculus, retail space, and 3 office towers in this portion of the site. Construction of the Performing Arts Center is underway. The second area is what we call the southern site, which is this area. And that area is located between Liberty Street and Albany Street, which is the site of Liberty Park Public Open Space, the relocated Greek Orthodox Church, currently under construction, and the World Trade Center Vehicular Security Center. The plan calls for 2 additional towers, one on the main site and one on the southern site. This information is provided as background information. The general project plan and the future development sites are not the subject of today's hearing. The subject of today's hearing is the proposed acquisition by condemnation and disposition of property by LMDC, all for no consideration. As I mentioned, implementation of the plan has created new development sites, open spaces, and streets within the World Trade Center site, and the intervening streets have been realigned or closed. Because the alignment of streets is different in the World Trade Center Memorial and Redevelopment Plan from what existed prior to September 11th, 2001, certain property transfers are required to conform ownership consistent with the new street grid, transportation, and security infrastructure, and the sites of the public open space and performing arts center as described in the general project plan. The Port Authority owned the original World Trade Center site, and the general project plan provides for the Port Authority to own the redeveloped World Trade Center site, with the exception of the surface streets. The streets from just below surface level and above are or will be owned by the city, while the property below the streets is or will be owned by the Port Authority.
Excuse me. Could you go back to the I can't read the square in the south portion.
We have printed hard copies.
Oh, where is that? Thank you.
And this one as well, I know it's very small, but we have it blown up on, I think, the first board over there. If you want to look at that later. So as shown on this slide, the proposed transactions include 9 parcels for which fee title will be acquired and transferred, and 2 easements, all of which are located in Lower Manhattan, New York, New York. 4 fee parcels will be acquired by condemnation from the City of New York and then transferred to the Port Authority to match ownership of the land with the current as-built location of Liberty Park and the Vehicle Security Center, and entrance into the below-grade areas of the World Trade Center complex. These parcels include parcels what we call S1, S2, S6, and S7. So again, you can see where these are located on that board later, so you can see where they are relative to the rest of the site. But S1 is a fee interest in a parcel of land along the southerly line of Liberty Street between West Street and Washington Street. It is 2,229 square feet, or 0.051 acres. The fee interest, S2, is the fee interest in an irregularly shaped parcel of land in Washington Street between Liberty Street and Cedar Street, and along the southerly line of Liberty Street between Washington Street and Greenwich Street. and S2 is 6,458 square feet, or 0.148 acres. S6 is the subsurface rights from 1.35 feet below the top of the curb in a parcel of land in the bed of Liberty Street between West Street and Greenwich Street, and that is 14,809 square feet, or 0.34 acres. S7 is the subsurface rights from 1.35 feet below top of curb in a parcel of land in the bed of Cedar Street between West Street and Washington Street. That parcel is 9,025 square feet, or 0.207 acres. Again, those are the parcels that are going to be acquired by LMDC by condemnation from the city and then transferred to the Port Authority. There is one parcel. Okay, so now we have blow-ups of those 4 parcels that I just talked about. Okay, and now we have parcel 8. This is a parcel that is currently owned by the Port Authority and will be transferred to the city and for street and sidewalk purposes. This one includes surface rights above 1.35 feet below top of curb in a parcel of land along the northerly line of Cedar Street between West Street and Washington Street, which is a portion of 155 Cedar Street. That parcel is 70 square feet, or 0.0016 acres. That one is owned by the port, will be transferred to the city for street and sidewalk purposes. Okay, then there's 4 parcels that are currently owned by LMDC that will be transferred to the city for street and sidewalk purposes. These are S4, which is surface rights above 1.35 feet below top of curb in a parcel of land along the northerly line of Cedar Street between West Street and Washington Street, west of 155 Cedar Street. That parcel is 205 square feet, or 0.005 acres. S4A is surface rights above 1.35 feet below top of curb in a parcel of land along the northerly line of Cedar Street between West Street and Washington Street, east of 155 Cedar. That parcel is 182 square feet, or 0.004 acres. S5 is the surface rights above 1.35 feet below top of curb in a parcel of land along the southerly line of Liberty Street and the westerly line of Greenwich Street, located at the intersection of Liberty and Greenwich Street. That parcel is 1,358 square feet, or 0.031 acres. And last, there's S9, which is the fee interest in a parcel of land, along the northerly line of Albany Street between Washington Street and Greenwich Street, and that's a portion of 130 Liberty Street. It's 140 square feet, or 0.0032 acres. So again, these are the ones that owned by LMDC now and will be transferred to the city because they are either already built as street and sidewalks in all cases except for S9, which has not actually been built, but everything else, again, this is just conforming with the as-built uses here. There are then, this is the blow-ups. So then we come to the 2 easements. There are 2 easement interests that will be acquired by condemnation from the city and transferred to the Port Authority. These are the Oculus easement. This is an easement interest in a volume of space in 2 locations on either side of the Oculus to accommodate the location of portions of the path Oculus, i.e. the wings, above Fulton Street and Greenwich Street. The first portion of this in-air easement is 16,071 square feet, or 0.369 acres, and the second portion is 1,767 square feet, or 0.040 acres. And there's also an easement related to the Performing Arts Center, which again, it has not been built, but it's been designed. This is an easement interest in a volume of space in two parts, one above the other, to accommodate the encroachment of a small portion of the Performing Arts Center building onto VZ Street. And that easement is 4.358 square feet. The proposed acquisitions and dispositions as part of the overall World Trade Center Memorial and Redevelopment Plan will align property ownership at the site consistent with the work that had been authorized as part of the World Trade Center Memorial and Redevelopment Plan, first approved in 2004 and last amended in 2007. The plan has furthered and will continue to further the redevelopment of the World Trade Center site as a mixed-use center of commerce, public spaces, and culture with a memorial at its heart, and advances the goals of the Urban Development Corporation Act, the objectives developed by LMDC, and the goals articulated by the Governor of the State of New York and the Mayor of the City of New York to remember and honor the victims of the terrorist attacks while revitalizing Lower Manhattan. As described in LMDC's environmental review documents, the World Trade Center Memorial and Redevelopment Plan was designed and is expected to achieve these goals while minimizing the potential for adverse environmental impacts. Nevertheless, as discussed in LMDC's environmental review documents, construction of the plan involves significant traffic, noise, and short-term air quality impacts. While LMDC has committed to a broad program of measures to mitigate or avoid these impacts, some adverse impacts are inevitable if the significant benefits of the plan are to be realized. As described above, much of this construction has been completed, and the transactions at issue at today's hearing do not authorize any further building on the site and do not result in any adverse environmental impacts. This hearing provides an opportunity for all interested persons to present oral or written statements and to submit other documents concerning the proposed acquisition and disposition of property needed to accomplish the objectives I've described. We look forward to receiving your comments. On behalf of LMDC, I thank you very much for being here and attending this hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Wexler. This is now the opportunity for you, the members of the public, to provide your input on the transfers of property that Ms. Wexler has described. Comments that are provided tonight were those submitted before the end of the comment period on July 19, 2019, will be used by LMDC to evaluate the transfers as appropriate. I have a few procedural items to introduce to the record. I am providing to the stenographer certain documents to be marked and demarked as exhibits to the record of today's hearing. The first is a copy of the public hearing notice for tonight's hearing. Second are copies of affidavits of mailing and delivery showing that the public hearing notice was sent to interested parties. Next are copies of affidavits confirming that the public hearing notice was published in 5 successive issues in the Daily News and the New York City Record from Monday, May 20, 2019 to Friday, May 24, 2019. Finally, although not required, notice of this hearing was posted at 5 conspicuous locations within the project area. Proof of the posting is also being given to the stenographer to be made an exhibit to the record of today's hearing. Those exhibits have been placed on the table in front of the stenographer and are deemed admitted. Written comments submitted after tonight must be received before the close of business at 5 p.m. on July 19, 2019. The address for comments is 22 Portland Street, 11th floor, New York, New York, 10007. Please send to the attention of Daniel Snello. Comments can also be submitted via email to publiccomment@renewnyc.com. As I mentioned, Mr. Snello's contact cards containing LMDC's addresses are also available at the document table. I will now quickly go over the procedures we will use tonight to receive oral comments. It is my job to ensure that comments you make on the project are received in an orderly fashion so that the record will be an accurate reflection of what's said. Again, there's this stenographer documenting tonight's proceedings. If you wish to speak tonight and you haven't filled out a speaker request card, please do so now. They are available at the signing table. I want to reiterate that this is not a town hall or Q&A session. It is an official public hearing to receive comments on the record relating to the proposed property acquisitions and dispositions. I will call on speakers in the following order. elected officials, their representatives of the local community boards, members of the public, in the order in which they signed up to speak. Each person who wishes to speak should have filled out a speaker request form, or you may do so now. I will take people in the order that they signed up. When I call your name, please come up to the microphone right in front. If you are not ready to speak when it is your turn, your card will be placed at the end of the pack, and you will be recalled at that time. I ask that you be courteous to your fellow participants and not interrupt while someone else is speaking. Everyone who wishes to speak will be given the opportunity to do so. All comments will be taken into consideration, and written comments will receive equal consideration with the oral comments received tonight. I ask that each of you limit your verbal comments to no more than 4 minutes. I will signal you when you have 30 seconds left in your time slot. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and help the stenographer by spelling if it is a name that is not too difficult, or may be difficult. If you are speaking on behalf of someone else or as a group, please identify who they are. Please speak clearly so that an accurate record of your comments can be made. Finally, I want to remind you again that the purpose of this hearing is to afford you an opportunity to make statements and comments about proposed project property acquisitions and dispositions. This is not a question and answer session. It is instead an opportunity for you to present your views so that the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation can consider them in making any final determination and findings in the New York Eminent Procedure Law and inform the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation pursuant to Section 16 of the New York State Urban Development Corporation Act. At this time, I'd like to call the speakers in the following words. We have cards for speakers.
So just to clarify, we thought we were going to use cards, but we did a sign-in sheet. So right now we have 4 people who have signed up to speak.
In that case, the first speaker will be Todd Fine. Yes.
Test. Yes, my name is Todd Fine, Toddfine. I am the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group. So 18 years after this process began, we are having an eminent domain hearing to seize land for a park that already exists and an Oculus wings that already exist. So we know that the World Trade Center is a unique case, but I think we can all agree that this is still a complete failure of our public processes because there is no comment that we could make that would change decisions that have already been made, let's be honest. Therefore, the issue is not transfers. It's the failure of the LMDC's transparency and the Port Authority's transparency processes and meeting their legal obligations in a reasonable manner. And therefore, because of this process is completely broken down, my position is that the Washington Street land in particular should not be seized by the LMDC and the Port Authority. The World Trade Center site have never shown any respect for the street grid, the historic street grid of New York that goes back to the early Republic of the United States. The World Trade Center itself destroyed many blocks of Washington Street, including hundreds of historic properties. This park may not last forever, and I think it would be better for the city and the LMDC to reach an agreement on how that street could maintain in the city's responsibility. There is actually in this hearing been no reason given why the LMDC actually needs to have, and why the Port Authority need to have ownership of this site. Apparently they've been operating completely fine for years without actually owning Washington Street. Second, the city should receive more funding for both this Washington Street and the easements. This is apparently a negotiated deal that was made. So it seems to me that the most valuable property by far is the Washington Street site and the Oculus Wings easements. I don't think these little slivers of streets, which should have sidewalks anyway and should be under city jurisdiction anyway, constitutes a fair transfer. And again, tonight there was no justification made about why this was a fair transfer. I think it's important for us to hear from the city's perspective of what is a fair transfer in this case. Without the city telling us why they made this agreement, it's very hard for us to comment on this being a good use of public ownership of public land that should be for the public benefit. Third, third, I think that money should go to historic preservation in particular. We have been concerned that the original principle of the supported by LMDC when the principle for the general project plan was first developed in April 2002 said that historic preservation would be a priority. Yet the Washington Street Advocacy Group has just released a study saying that among the properties that the Lower Manhattan Emergency Preservation Fund said were important in this area south of the World Trade Center site, 26% of historic properties have already been demolished. And we anticipate that all low-rise historic buildings will be demolished given the prioritization of this plan in building luxury housing and demolitions of historic low-rise buildings, which apparently will continue to take place with the 5 World Trade Center plan, which again, like this hearing, will probably be done, will have received public comment long after the critical decisions are made, given the status quo. Finally, the city,
30 seconds.
Finally, I think that the city needs to provide, the city should also oppose this transfer until the MOU of understanding between the Port Authority and the LMDC regarding 5 World Trade Center are made public. It is outrageous for the city to transfer this property and to be involved in this World Trade Center site at all if this decision to build a luxury tower at the last World Trade Center site cannot be received public comment. And that needs to have an extensive public comment hearing. And I hope you'll commit tonight to make an extensive public comment process for 5 World Trade site as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fine. The next speaker will be Kathleen Moore.
I pass.
Kathleen Moore passes. The next speaker then will be Lynn Ellsworth.
I'm Lynn Ellsworth. I'm chair of the Tribeca Trust, the only neighborhood civic organization. We strongly object to any transfer of city street assets to the Port Authority or to the LMDC. We feel that it would result in an abridgment of our constitutional rights of freedom of speech and assembly, as I have experienced this morning at a public-private plaza across the street at a press conference. We were shepherded into the only part of the streetscape where we were allowed to exercise those constitutional rights, and we were, shepherded off the pops. And I'm afraid that the way LMDC and the Port Authority manage the streetscape is that it's more like a private space than a public one. So we object. We think that the consequences would be severe. Last, I think that it's kind of peculiar to bend over backwards to give any more assets to the Performing Arts Center, which we in Tribeca feel is one of the biggest boondoggle projects and a waste of philanthropic dollars we've seen in a long time. A lot of other places in the performing arts where philanthropic money would be better spent. And last, I think the World Trade Center 5 site should be more widely discussed. It's our position that it should be kept into a land trust for 100% affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. The next speaker.
Can I take Kathleen's spot or whatever spot is available?
The next speaker is Esther Regelson.
I just want to reiterate what Lynn and Todd spoke about, but I also am very concerned that you don't really do public hearings, because you let us know in the daily news. Did you let the Downtown Express or the Battery Park City Broadsheet or other downtown papers be aware, to let the public be aware of this hearing? I don't think so. In fact, a lot of the community board members had no idea that this was going on. And so nobody knew. So this is not really a public hearing. This is just for show. And we need more discussion about Trade Center, about Tower 5, because it's really just going to be more corporate interests involved. And we're a neighborhood. I've lived here for over 30 years. I live on Washington Street, a few blocks away. And you made the site so impersonal. It's just ridiculous. This street, Washington and Cedar, is a dead end. It's a dead zone. Nobody wants to go there. There's no sidewalk on Washington and Cedar heading toward West Street that you can walk on. You have to cross 2 streets to be on a sidewalk. And it's just impersonal. It's a dead zone. It's ridiculous. You have to reopen Cedar Street the whole way. It's just not giving anyone who lives or works here fulfillment in the neighborhood. There's just nothing. It's dead. So I hope you'll have more hearings and give us more notice and proper notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Regelson. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment? Please come up. State your name, address, and affiliation.
My name is Mary Perillo. I'm 125 Cedar Street resident for 36 years. And I was
Spell Perillo?
Perillo. And I once was a founder of the World Trade Center Neighborhood Alliance, which is now dormant. But I'm here because I'm curious, as a former member, a public member of the early LMDC public hearing situation where there was an advisory board. A number of us here were on that advisory board, and when the LMDC kind of closed down what they were doing as things were built, we were completely shut out of every little bit of any kind of process that's going on. And as we get closer to building whatever that is in Site 5 World Trade, we would very much like to know early on in advance how that will impact us. I have 10 windows that overlook that site. It's going to be another skyscraper in my face. And I think that the LMDC really needs to go back to having a community advisory board for the people who are affected by what they're doing down here. And from what I understand, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I am, that it's mostly what you're talking about now is just a fait accompli, taking Port Authority streets and turning them back to the city. Is that right? No one's going to answer that. It's the paperwork. I'll read it. But since this is the first look at the paperwork, I don't know these things. If that's the case, an important thing to remember for the community, and I'm saying this so it goes back to everyone, including the city, is that we have a firehouse right on that corner closest to the World Trade Center. Currently, when they have eastern fires, what they do is they come down Greenwich and go up one way the wrong way on Cedar Street, which is unbelievably dangerous every day. So I think something that needs to happen early is that the firehouse has to have a proper egress and be able to respond quickly to fires.
Thank you, Ms. Perillo. And there was another person who wants to speak. Please come up.
My name is Alan.
Whatever your preference.
My name is Alan Lubell, ALLEN, LUBOW. I live at 125 Cedar Street. We have the unfortunate situation of a firehouse on the corner that exits onto the site and then must make a hard left turn and exit onto Cedar Street because of the permanent barrier and temporary construction that's going on Liver Street now. So it frightens me to think that the city is relinquishing control of the streets that might be used by the firehouse to someone who has no relationship whatsoever with the New York City Fire Department. And I think serious consideration should be given because there is upcoming construction on Cedar Street and the number 5 site. So that should be seriously thought out. Right now it's a disaster. Every time a fire truck leaves, they, in anticipation of running into cars going in the wrong direction, blast their horns and wake up everybody anytime, day or night, on Cedar Street. So we're living in a hellish situation right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lubeck. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment? Let the record reflect that no one has answered in the affirmative to that question, and the time is now 6:31. We will go off the record and remain here until 7:30 if someone else comes who wishes to make a statement. Thank you.
I'm thinking about it. Oh, sure. We'd be faster walking. You want to just walk? I'll come.